And we are live. My name's JP Berg, and this is Dumb the Wiser. Today we're joined by Mr. Dale Richardson. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right. I'm just taking it easy.
Nice. It's good to have you on, man. I watched a podcast you've done with my friend Payman Ascari regarding feminism, and I feel you have some deep insight on that particular topic. So I thought it'd be cool to have you on for a informal conversation.
All right. Yeah. I mean, we did had a good discussion on it. And I actually started to look deeply into feminism because I was talking to a woman and she said, "Well, take a look at first wave feminism." Because I was like, "Well, I don't need to be a feminist or anything to believe in, you know, equal rights for people, equal representation underneath the law, right?" I'm like, "We're different, but, equal in value." And so I began to look at the feminists and I started to look at the first wave and read their materials. And what I found was it was worse than I expected. And everything that we're seeing now today was laid down at the first wave. And what we're seeing is the development of the seeds that were planted at that time. And they were not, they didn't hide this. History did, but they did not.
So it was it there I heard of some of the correlations between theophacy and the occult and some of these first wave feminists. And like you said, or like we were discussing prior to going live, I was made aware of this link relative to Rachel Wilson's book, which discusses this particular issue. I just watched some podcasts. I did not read the book, but it's pretty shocking when you discover the origins of a lot of this. And the core premise was to destabilize religion, to destabilize society, utilizing this under the guise of liberation. It's always everything that's happened in society is presented to us as like a liberty choice, right? So this was under the guise of liberating women, and really it had some pernicious origins. So why don't you break down some of that?
Yeah, this right at the core. It goes right back to the Garden of Eden and what Eve did. And this is like Stanton talks, Elizabeth Cady Stanton talks about this. Helena Blavatsky, who is a theosophist, which Stanton was a theosophist, so was Gage, and also Annie Besant was took up the mantle after Blavatsky in the UK, and she was a prominent first wave feminist in the UK. It ties back to saying that Eve was the one who made the right decision and she had to stand up to protect humanity to get the light of liberation from the devil, right? The serpent. And this is the fundamental premise, and that the fertility goddess, which is representative of what Eve did, is the liberation of the woman. Gerda Lerner actually talks about this in the creation of the patriarchy. She ties the female sexual liberation to the fertility goddess, which is Astarte Ashtaroth, right? The female aspect of Baal, which is fertility worship, where they were, I mean, killing children and doing all kinds of sexual degenerate behavior. This is what they're tying to female liberation. And this was laid from the foundation. And so it in Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the Woman's Bible, she says that Christianity and the Bible were the biggest obstacles to the woman's social, economic, and political power. So this was a thirst for power, and they're looking at it as an obstacle to power. And because at the time, white men were the ones primarily holding the power around this time, white men were looked at the biggest obstacle. Another thing that people don't realize is that a lot of these first wave feminists were very much eugenicists and they were racists. And this benefited them very well because racial divisions allowed white women, because most of these women were white at the time, they were the elite. Stanton was the wife of a judge, came from money. A lot of these women, they were either came from a lot of money, or like the Claflin sisters or Woodhull and Claflin, were funded by the Vanderbilts. This is how they got into the stock, becoming stock traders, because they were backed by the Vanderbilts, like mega money. So these were people who had positions of power that the average woman would never aspire to. So they used them to elevate their position. But they were eugenicists, and it allowed them, and the racists, so they would allow women to be put in positions where men should be. This is, they benefited from this by far. And then it also made the men more emotional and not rational, because a man would normally sit down and say, well, yeah, I don't like you, but you are not working against me, right? So this guy is trying to kill us. So they'll be more rational in saying, this guy, I may not agree with him on everything, but this guy over here is trying to kill us both. So let's work together. This is how the rational male mind works. But a feminized male mind that is more emotional is like, well, you made me feel bad, so I don't care, right? And this is generally the way that women would think in those situations. So go ahead.
Well, they're definitely known to be higher in negative emotion. That's one thing. But what intrigues me the most about it, and it's like you're saying, we're seeing the cause and effect of seeds that were planted a long time ago, seeds to which the origin many don't realize. But when you look at the effect that feminism has had on the family, on our institutions more broadly, the way our education system is set up, it's more leaning towards female productivity. Like they tend to they're more agreeable by nature, and they're able to sit for long periods of time, and they want to please, where men aren't necessarily prone to behavior like that. So comparatively, we're being outcompeted. And then that leads to more women through academia, more women in higher roles, and that has a destabilizing effect, because you have a lot of women that aren't attracted to men, because in many cases they make more money than men do.
Yes, and the whole fundamental premise on this was to destabilize the familial order, and they attacked this. And if you look at Helena Blavatsky, she is the co-founder of Theosophy, and she wrote extensively about this. And she had a book called Isis Unveiled. This is one of the biggest things that is cited, because it's like the rise of the fertility goddess. This is the phoenix rising, that type of mentality that is used by the feminists. This is what it's alluding to, bringing back the fertility goddess to where they say she should be, which is the representation of Eve taking the fruit from the devil and the fall of mankind, which is bad. Like, I mean, it's bad. They want the woman to be the savior of mankind, because men are too stupid. They are, tied into this patriarchy. They were deceived by God, and that they are working mindlessly, and so the women have to re-instruct them on how to be proper men. The problem with that being is that who is responsible for the creation of the critical infrastructure? Men. Who is responsible for the protection of society? Men. Women don't understand how to protect themselves from bad men. This is one of the biggest reasons why women were not in politics, because they could not protect themselves from bad men. That was the responsibility of men, to protect them and their families from other bad men. And so, how can a woman who doesn't understand how to protect herself from a bad man protect men and women from bad men? And this is not saying that women were never consulted, but when it came to matters of protection, you were definitely not in that conversation, because how could you? You don't know the first thing about that, right?
And
It's go
it's
ahead.
just the division it creates too. It's like men are pitted against women now. We're supposed to work in harmony. And like feminism has hurt women more than it's hurt men, and it's hurt us both. We're suffering as a result. We are one, and we are not, and we're so like incongruous now that we're just, you see, look, for instance, I seen you commenting relative to Nick Fuentes, and some of the way he lays out, he's kind of the representative of that incel male, the young man that has been alienated by society, and he's definitely one of the bigger representatives of that. And then you look at young females, and it's the same thing. Like, it's almost like at this point they dislike one another.
Yes, and the reason why they dislike one another is because they're not the natural state of masculine and feminine, right? You look at this. What feminism has done was denigrated the true power of the woman. Like I tell people all the time, the most important job on planet Earth is a mother. The number two job on planet Earth is being a father. The mother cannot properly do her job without the help of a father because they're designed to work together.
Mhm.
Because the mother, while she's nurturing the minds of the children, the father is there to create the circumstances for the family to thrive, for the woman to feel safety and security, so she'll be a better parent to her children because women have the most power out of anybody on planet Earth in the role of a mother. They literally shape the future events and dictate the world way the world is going to go by the minds that they shape. They control the thinking of their children that is going to go across their entire life. This is why the state destroyed the fathers to replace the mothers so that they could take the role that the mother would play in laying that foundation in their children. And this is why we are where we are, because women have been taking out of the role, they've denigrated it, but it's the most important role on planet Earth. Look at what happened with their indoctrinating our children, right?
Mhm.
This is insane.
It's funny you mentioned the Vanderbilts, putting some money into early, advocating for this cause, but some of my research has shown me that the Rockefeller Association
Oh
was
yes,
also a big player in funding this, and it's funny because
very
it's
much.
a lot of these same names that come out during this era that were utilizing their NGO model to influence the culture and therefore the politics of the Western countries.
Oh yes. The Rockefellers were very much heavily involved. I mentioned Vanderbilts because those two women were not necessarily rich women, but
Mhm,
they got ahead because of backing of those that kind of money. And we saw this happening everywhere. And a lot of these guys were white supremacists and eugenicists that hated the average white person because they looked at you as a slave class. Like, I mean, the elite, they had every prejudice known to mankind within their minds. They hated everybody because they believed that they were above everybody else. And when you understand their type of religion and thinking, you see this. It becomes very clear. And so they use these things to divide and destroy people. And so feminism was the easiest way because if you control the women, then you control what is being put into the children's heads.
mhm.
And this is why. And then we brought in like a person that we mentioned before, Edward Bernays. Everybody should go out and read his book, Propaganda, because when you read propaganda, you will see everything that is being done to influence us. This guy understood mass psychology, this guy understood how to manipulate people. The way we look at women today, with that very thin type of woman, was not the way society viewed women and what was attractive. This man is responsible for shifting the way that we viewed women because, like those rail thin models that you see walking down the runway that look like little boys, that was never thought of attractive. Women were often depicted as a little bit heavier with the thicker hips because of the childbearing and that sort of thing, that it was looked at as you were healthier, you had more money, all of these things. This guy shifted this. This guy also shifted like breakfast. Like people are talking about bacon and eggs and stuff like that to ward off the Muslims and stuff. People never ate bacon and eggs. Like maybe if you had it like as leftovers or you know what I mean from the night before, because breakfast was not a huge thing. But he was the one, the meat companies wanted to make more money. So they came to him. He got a propaganda campaign. And then they had studies, kind of like the studies that they did from COVID. He was the one who got the engineer that to get them to start doing these types of things. And
Hmm.
then we got the bacon and eggs type of thing. He worked for a lot of large corporations. He helped start a war in in um in Latin America because he worked for the which is now Chiquita, the Universal Banana
United
Company,
Fruit Company.
the United Fruit Company. That's it. And they ended up starting a war. He used propaganda to do this, and he called it then public relations. He's the father of propaganda. This guy he's Sigmund Freud's nephew, far more brilliant. His wife was actually a feminist, but they came from a family of sexual abuse. There was pedophiles in their family.
Which is another common theme with a lot of these people. I'm very aware of Bernays, and I will recommend to people if they're not into reading books, there's a documentary on YouTube called The Century of the Self, I believe, and it's relative to Bernays' influence. Another famous story he did, and it's relevant to women, is he had the debutantes during the parade in New York, all at a certain time, pull out a package of Marlboros and light up a cigarette. Was it Lucky Strikes?
Lucky Strike.
I knew it was a cigarette company, and that was like he was famous because overnight the demographics that they wanted to increase with, which was women smokers, went through the roof. So the efficacy of this type of societal manipulation, which is now known, you hear the term societal engineering, and that's what I commonly reference because I mean at this point, when you start to look into Bernays, when you start to look into how fundamental the conditioning has been for us and how we perceive ourselves in this world, you realize that we've been led astray in the most profound of ways. And feminism for me, with my minimal research, has shown me that's one of the biggest cores of our problems.
Yes, it is the biggest core because of the way that it works on the women, and the women are the ones who are laying the foundation for the character and the mind development of the children. So if you get the women, you've got society, because they're going to be, and especially when you have the single parent homes and so forth. But one other thing that people should look at with Bernays, he did a book called The Engineering of Consent, right? And this is the whole idea of the social engineering, like the mass psychology. This guy, master of manipulation. We have to start thinking about how this is done. And because we get into this wokeness, and there was a woman I saw online, I started to look at her. I'm going to go in depth on what she was doing, but she talked about wokeness as a direct result of the feminization of society. And this is a natural result because, and what she's saying is in line with what I see, because Marxism, that type of governance, it is a natural result when women start to get into control, right? Because when you replace the man, you need the state to replace the man, right? Women can't protect themselves, so they turn to the state. They need the state to be the enforcement, right? When a woman goes into a job, she submits to her boss instead of to a husband. The boss is not going to treat her the same way as someone who loves her, and all of these things, but they teach you that submission to a man is bad, when submission realistically means to submit to his love and protection, not to sit there and be a slave. That's not submission in the term of a marriage. It is, he's like, biblically speaking, that term submit is like follow the lead of your military commander. And if you're in a war, which a lot of the times we are, the man is the one responsible for the protection. So he's like, let him handle that for you and he'll love you. Respect him. This is really what it is, which most women want male protection. So when they say submit, they pervert the whole thing, but then they have to make that oppressor oppressed, which is indicative of what's necessary for Marxism, because without that oppressor oppressed mentality, Marxism is pretty much toast, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's what we've seen. We've seen a lot of derivations of Marxism. Like we've seen it turn into, the biggest one would be Marcuse, who started he was known for critical theory. And then we've seen it go into critical race theory, the same premise, oppressor and oppressed, reducing individuals down to their immutable characteristics and categorizing them within a network of systemic oppression. So it's really created a society of victims where we put such a high price on it. And I mean, again, it comes from Marxism, and Marx has some unique occult ties. He was rather satanic himself. He wrote a satanic opera, if my memory recalls it correctly. But I do want to do some housekeeping here before we continue. We got about 113 people watching live. It's immensely advantageous if you guys could share this stream. I'm very heavily deboosted in the algorithm, so we appreciate it muchly. But going back to the topic, feminism, it's funny because you see so many people now that have no comprehension of it. Like, we've normalized a lot of these terms, and that's how it comes first semantically. Like, feminism is considered a positive thing by so many people today. They don't correlate some of the problems we're seeing with that. So it's like it's such a steep hill to climb, because you have to kind of reteach them everything. It's essentially like, go ahead.
It's because they mix truth with error. And yes, were there men that were abusive? Yes. And when you listen to a lot of the first wave feminists, they sound like abused women, right? And were they just in saying they were abused? Of course they were. Nobody should be abused. And some of the things that they raised serious points. But the answer that they gave was not the correct answer. And then when you have a bunch of abused women that are actually trying to dictate the way things are, that's bad. It's very bad. But they took truth and error and they mixed them together. And that is why it becomes so deceptive. Because nobody lies 100% of the time, not even the devil. The devil, even when he lied to Eve, he partially told the truth and he partially lied. It still made it all a lie, but he had to give some truth to make it plausible. Because you can't go to somebody and just say something that is not even rooted in any type of reality and get them to believe it. There has to be some element of truth in it in order to make the lie believable. And so people have to start understanding that, and not maybe necessarily attack them head on. Find common ground and begin to start challenging them and asking them questions, and ask them to go in and look into things for themselves, because when they start seeing it themselves, they're going to start raising questions. Because when you begin to look at what it was doing from its inception, the question begins to be why? Why hide the occult nature of it? Why are they trying to bring this into the church when those types of things are very much incompatible? Why is it bent on the destruction of the family? Right? Because without families, you have no society.
And that's what we're seeing now. And it's like we were kind of alluding to. This is not occurring organically. This is something that's being pushed inorganically through a lot of NGOs. And when you look at it, when I say a multi-prong attack, you look at, like, after Kennedy was assassinated in America and Lyndon Johnson got in, the first thing he did was pass the Great Society welfare reform. So when you look at the Black community in America, and I got a lot of this data from reading Thomas Sowell, the marriage rates were in the 70 percentile. And right after this welfare reform happened, it emasculated the men. It number one, it allowed the state to provide more money per child for the women of the community than the men could realistically in the economy. So it had an emasculating effect, and it had a destabilizing effect, pitting the man against the woman. And you've seen that in that community now. I believe it's within the 30%. But this, it was more prevalent there, but it's occurred everywhere. No one's getting married. We liberalized the marriage laws in the same decade. So it was almost like it was such a concerted effort. And when you start to research it, you could see it's like, oh my God, they proactively destroyed the family in the West.
Oh yes, and they did this in a test case, and this is where the racism and segregation came in, because people have to accept the fact that there is bad racism to all different races, and that's occurring right now. What ends up happening, and this is what I've observed, you'll have the white racists, black racists, Asian racists, they'll all work together in order to accomplish their nonsense. Like this, we watched Marcus Garvey working with the KKK, prime example. So they'll get together, and you'll have the white racists that will go be very racist towards blacks and other minorities. But then they'll be very kind to the white people, right? And they would think that everybody is treated this way. The black people will do this to the black people. This is how they all work. So each individual person would think that the racists among them are actually good people because of the way that they treat them. and they will have an assumption that everybody else is being treated the same way fairly as they are, which is nothing further from the truth. But these people are very calculated because they're using this as a mechanism to destroy people. And so then when a random white person, a random black person may see each other that are affected by it, then they're going to start to hate each other because of the experiences of these racist people that were directing their actions towards them, right? This is how you create unrest and so forth, divide and conquer, because you can see that these people who have been doing this have been working in lockstep for a very long time. So the isolation worked to their advantage because they needed test cases, and they did this in the Native American community. They did this within the Black community, where you're watching this progression of feminism and Marxism that was tailored to their communities, and watch the destruction. Now, like, okay, we're satisfied where this is going. Now we're going to bring it to the larger group as a whole. And this is where you're seeing now the racism being directed towards the white people. But who's behind directing the racism towards the white people? Other white people, because the government is the one who started to do this. But this is the mentality of the elitists. And then they bring in the minorities that hate them and so forth, so that the frustration that they've already embedded into them, they're going to look to them instead of the real source of the problem, the elites that are coming to kill us. Like, for example, like we're watching right now with the Somalians that did the fraud, which is terrible. But that level of fraud, people aren't grasping this because they're seeing the Somalians getting emotional, getting angry that they're stealing and they're illegal immigrants. But who brought them here? The government. Who laid the foundation for that? You cannot pull off that level of fraudulent activity without the government's participation and creating that framework. That wouldn't exist without the government doing it. But this is the reason why the feminism is being so destructive, because it's feminized men that were not thinking like men, and they're being miserable because of it, and they can't deal with the problems. And now the women want the men to protect them, but they can't because they're thinking like them.
Well, at the same time, too, when feminism was occurring, there was this. They were characterizing masculinity as toxic. And we see this culture now where men are taught to be ashamed of their masculine urges, and there's no expression for it. When you read up about developmental psychology, like Piaget and people that are known in that world, like the rough play that occurs between young boys is fundamental. It's foundational for building their psychology healthy. Like, we have to do rough play. We're young men. But we're at the point now where it's like the anti-bullying stuff in the schools, like you can't even touch each other as children in school, like to rough play. And I mean, we're just seeing this. If you characterize masculinity as toxic, then you don't even have a rudimentary concept of what masculinity is. It's a nurturing force at its core. We're intended to be strong so we can protect and provide. That's, you know what I mean? And it's so distorted now that it's considered aggressive. And people, you see, I read some literature that indicates too, when you have an environment where masculinity is kind of suppressed, you don't have necessarily effeminate men. What you will start to see eventually is hypermasculinity. And I think when you look at some characters like Andrew Tate, you're starting to see that. You know what I mean? He's very much a reflexive response of the times, where masculinity has been suppressed to the like healthy masculinity. Then you see these extreme examples arise.
What you're seeing is a response to abuse, because men and this is the people who did this, they understood what they were doing. When you abuse a woman, she's going to turn inwardly, right? And she's going to be inward. You abuse a man, he's going to go outwardly. He's going to attack. This is how you know that we're wired as protectors, because if somebody's barging through the door, the woman's going to run for the kids instinctively, and the man should be instinctively running to the door to deal with the source of the problem, because when we're under threat, we go out and we deal with the threat. But when you abuse a man, this is what happens. So when they're saying hypermasculinity, what it is that men have been abused for a long time, and they're going on the offensive, and they're continually being abused. And if you watch this is what happens. And this is how they get men into violent situations. and so forth. Because, for example, the family court system, which was designed to destroy the families, they oftentimes will provoke men to no end so that they snap. And then they'll be like, you see, he was violent. Well, you took his kid, you started putting the child into abuse. And one of the worst things you can do to a man isn't harm them physically. It's take away the ability to provide and protect for their families, and that's how men kill themselves. Right? It's really what it is. And feminism is by the fact that they're pushing women into male spaces and not giving them anywhere to go, and you're pushing them out. And then the women, they've changed the way our educational system is to slant it towards women, right, and favor the women's learning. They're pushing the men out, but then we're seeing more of a breakdown of society because women are not the ones to build and maintain the critical infrastructure and the things that we need. Women are very, very important in society. They're just not good at being men, just like men are not good at being women. This is basic common sense.
And we started to go back to the 60s for a moment here, because again, me referencing this multi-prong attack. Another thing that I've referenced frequently in my discussions relative to this is programming in the 60s. Like, we watched from Father Knows Best, the archetype for a strong male, you know what I mean? Very classic Western family, to Archie Bunker. And Archie Bunker is cited frequently as being kind of, that was the attack on masculinity. All of a sudden you have this archetype for situational comedies where there's a buffoonish male, and he's kind of racist, he's kind of an idiot, and he's losing all of the arguments. It's emasculating him in the plot of the show on the regular. But it's funny. And that's when people are most susceptible to being propagandized, is when they think they're being entertained. So what we're seeing is the ramifications of that. And we've seen that formula for comedy being repeated right down to some of the animated series. We see it in the Family Guy, Al Bundy, 100%. It's the same premise, man, and that's what really pushes the culture. And politics being downstream from culture, you're just seeing the effects of this. And again, when you tie all of these things together, and like we've already referenced, this is inorganic. This is we're being manipulated to the point where they're manufacturing or engineering our behavior. I mean, it's kind of hard not to feel a little hopeless by it. Like, how do we get out of this? What's a pragmatic way to start to reverse this?
Well, a lot of it is starting to begin to educate yourself on what's going on. And one thing I wanted to touch on here is that the feminism, and this was very, very, very clear in the United States. Feminism benefited from Black men. Because coming out of slavery, they were wanting to have their equal rights, and they used them to get that. Feminists also, they are the original DEI, and women benefit from DEI far more than anyone else, and particularly elitist white women who are the feminists, who were the ones that were being funded by all of these and working with, like, the Rockefellers. These women, the average woman, you are not receiving anywhere near the benefit of what they're selling, because there are people who want power and it ain't you. And this is what people have to understand. You have more in common with the average person across from you than you do with these rich billionaires that are sitting there that you have no idea. You're fighting their wars to give them power and control. People have to understand that. Now we need to go back to doing things sensibly and learning to work with our neighbor, because you have to stop treating people like they're your enemy. And even though I don't agree with feminists, I don't agree with feminism, I don't hate feminists. Most feminists are just misguided, right? They've been taught something that they was told to be great, but they don't know all the history and what it's actually doing. So to treat each individual person like your enemy, it's wrong, because they were just taught wrong. It is, you know what I mean? Most people are well intentioned. There are a few that are nefarious. Don't get me wrong. We always have bad apples, but most people aren't that way. We need to start treating people like they're not our enemy, but the people who were influencing them, they're real enemies, right?
Mhm. I agree. It's like we've been born into a perpetual psyop. And, like, now since COVID, post-COVID, there's many people like you and I, there's millions of us that are really paying attention and starting to analyze this, but the vast majority of people are still in the conditioning that they were provided with. They can't see outside of that, and that's like there has to be, some kind of a shock to their system to kinda wake them up.
Yes, and this is why I've always said that men have to be the ones to pick up the bootstraps and deal with this, because we are primarily the leaders, and we are the ones that are the protectors and the drivers of that area of society. If we don't step into doing these roles and speaking by our actions, this is not going to get done. You cannot this is why women primarily woke up first, because women are more verbal than men. We have greater visual spatial skills. It actually changes the way that we process in our brain, and how we come to conclusions are different. We speak more by our actions. We infer actions in behavior, even in words, that women do not. And this is very common. This is one of the reasons why the Bible says that men are supposed to teach, because it was written by men. They inferred actions in those words that men are common to men but not are common to women. So if you don't understand how a man thinks, how can you explain to a man how he thinks? You can't. It's not being sexist, it's just being practical. If women wrote it, then we'd have to have women explaining it to us, because I don't understand how women think. I see what they do, but it makes no sense to me because I don't think that way. So it's nothing to be about sex. So we have to starting to come together and work together with our strengths. Because if you have a man and a woman together, this is why they broke down the family unit. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. A woman is going to be a better woman when she has the right man with her. A man will be a better man when he has the right woman for her, and they will together be greater than they will be apart. And it is an exponential difference. This is why they break down a family, because a man who is fighting for his family is a lot different than a man who's fighting for himself. Because
Mhm.
yes, your drive to stay alive for yourself is one thing, but when you have a kids and a wife that you love, you will become Superman, right? And
Mhm.
this is what they don't want. This is why they're breaking us down. So we need to find a way to start reaching each other. And the older generation needs to work with the younger ones.
It's funny, I read some, I've read something somewhere that indicated that one of the biggest destabilizing factors in a society and a nation is a large population of unmarried men. Like, young single men are how revolutions kind of come to pass, right? They're the vehicle for these causes, and you're seeing that now. Like, there's just and like we were kind of referencing, like, there's this whole incel movement. Like, men are so alienated from women and women from men that they don't even know how to interact with one another. We're seeing men stay single well into into their 20s and 30s. It's just it's kind of reaching the pinnacle now where it's got to start to get better, or the society is just going to fail.
Well, what we have to understand is that the the feminism is what's causing the incel. It is because in the one of in, when you read Gerda Lerner's creation of the picture, and this was explicit in other writings, but she very much ties the sexual liberation of the woman, says that marriage is bondage and all of these things, that it was used to control the woman's sexuality and so forth. Then the sex in a marriage, which is supposed to be a sign of love and affection, and for the marriage to build on the foundation of the intimacy in the marriage to help them grow closer together, now becomes a bargaining chip and something that is commodified. Women have been taught to commodify themselves. They say men don't sexualize us, but we're going to commodify and sexualize ourselves, but don't do it. But we still want you to sexualize us when we're doing it for profit or for our own gratification. but don't ever cross the line. It's impossible, right? You've created a situation where you've taken something in that's foundational to relationships, and then you've made it an adversarial point, and women are using and leveraging sex for power. This is ultimately then, and then when you look at the hypergamy and so forth that women traditionally do, and then they're elevating the pay of women, a lot of men are being cut out, and then women, when they are in control, they deal with power very differently because they are not designed as protectors, and they don't see things the way that men do, and they don't get the same consequences as men for doing the same things. So then you are in effect breeding tyrannical behavior because of that. Because where there is no consequence, you look at the justice system. There's no consequences for judges, and look at what they're doing. Right?
Yeah, there's no disincentive, and it's like I say frequently, if there's no repercussion or reprimand, then it's not a rule, it's a suggestion. If you have a rule, it has to have a reprimand for breaking it, or again, it's a suggestion, a behavioral suggestion, as opposed to a hard rule. Like they're linked in that capacity.
Yeah, we have to have consequences. And this is where then again, when the men have become weakened, and this is over time, men have to start taking control of situations where men go out and say, go out and sleep with a bunch of women. No, you're an idiot. Because when you're controlled by lust, then women can have control over you, because they are the ones that, when men start becoming disciplined and saying, no, I'm not going to jump into bed with you, because this is the best way a man can find who a good woman is, to not jump into bed with her, because sleeping with a woman is like drugs. It is worse than drugs. It will cloud your mind. You go to any man, random man, and ask them the dumbest things they've done in their life, and I guarantee you the words because of so and so, or because of that woman, whatever, how it comes out, almost all of the time it's because of a woman. Women are men's kryptonite. Men have to understand that we are weak to women in a way, especially because we're visual. We're weak visually. Discipline yourself. When you start to do that, then you will show by your example how women need to go. Men have to become disciplined, because if the women are have to deal with a men that are disciplined and they want that man, then what are they going to do? They're going to have to adjust accordingly. We set the tone.
It's funny where you were mentioning how sometimes it's presented, if women are utilizing their sexuality themselves, it's empowering, is how they frame it. And then you look at the prevalence of OnlyFans and some of the destabilizing consequences of that in society. There's countries that just make it illegal. And it's obvious that's going to harm your society to do that. And pornography in general, like I think that's one of the larger factors in the sexes being alienated from one another. Because at the end of the day, I think man's evolutionary sex drive would kind of compel him more to figure it out. But now with a lot of these young men, they have curated pornography sites that go by genre. It's disgusting. And I mean, it's there, and the readily access, like it's in their pockets. When I was a young boy, I remember one of my friends would steal his dad's Playboy magazine. And
Yes.
I mean, but now when you look at how the advancement in that specific realm has occurred, it's just it's hard to be optimistic about us getting out of this.
Yes, and I agree with you what you're saying here, because don't get me wrong, Playboy's, it wasn't good,
Mm,
but the damage done from a Playboy magazine, as opposed to having all of this pornography on demand
mhm.
at a young age with all of these extreme types of things, this is bad. And the tech companies, there's a lot of these guys that are there, like, okay, the actors and actresses, that's one thing, but the biggest issue is the tech companies and the companies that own this, because even a lot of the people there, you look at their situations and why they're there, there's a lot of varied reasons, and so they're all different reasons. So I'm not going to look at all, lump them all together, but what's being done is what they're doing is then taken by other companies and it's driven into the hands of children. They had a study done here in Alberta. By the time before 18, 98% of all children have been exposed to pornography, and more than a third before the age by the age of 10. You give pornography to children under the age of 10. Under 18, that's bad enough. But under the age of 10, they're finished. A child is not a child that young is going to just not be able to control themselves, and they'll keep consuming it. But then in order to get the same feeling, you're going to have to work harder and harder and harder stuff. And so you're beginning to see this trend towards all of this extreme pornography, like this violent stuff, and this push towards pedophilia. They're normalizing this. And when you look at how this is being systematically pushed in here, and then they're recruiting the women to go into OnlyFans and saying that you're going to do all of this stuff, hype them up. More and more women are going into OnlyFans. More of this content is becoming available, being pushed to children. Then they're coming with this transgender ideology because now the children are confused because the pornography is like, it's like molesting the kids without ever having to touch them. So you've got a bunch of molested kids that are now being pushed into this gender confusion, and it's making more children become exploited, which will then drive more of them into places like OnlyFans. And what they're selling as liberation is actually slavery, because once you get into that situation, you've damaged yourself, and it makes it very hard to come out and to live a normal life. And anybody who tells you otherwise is lying.
Yeah, it's a positive feedback loop, and it's continuing to get worse. It's like I say, I can't help but think that we're at the end of it, and you're seeing a lot of conversations such as this occurring. Very big people are discussing that. I watched Brett Weinstein or Weinstein, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Him and his wife, the Dark Horse podcast, they did an episode about how to start to mitigate some of the alienation of the sexist. And I think that's interesting to see larger people talk about it, because the more it enters the public lexicon being discussed, the more people are going to start to realize. And it's like a lot of people will say right away, oh, well, you and I are being misogynistic, or we're far right, or whatever the characterization would be to attempt or endeavor to discredit our views. But once you start to look into the history of this, it's very evident that this is a tool of our control. This is a tool to destabilize and hurt us. And I mean, it's you have to acknowledge that in order to find a pragmatic solution.
I'm gonna sit down and say, throughout my life, personal experience, I have been extremely harmed by feminism. And for example, one of the first experiences in school, like I got tested in school to go ahead. I was, reading long before school and all that kind of stuff. I got tested for IQ in school. The feminist who was doing the testing lied to keep me back, right? And then I had to and then even the principal told me that black kids don't learn or as fast as white kids, which is a lie. Like, kids learn relatively the same when given the opportunity to learn. And so I ended up having to go to school, get it retested. The guy who tested they brought an Asian guy to do the retesting, and they did it multiple times. The guy just about cursed when he said it. He's like, what she did was, it was impossible. The standard deviation, this was so far outside of the standard deviation, it was impossible for it to be an error, right? And the guy cursed when he was talking about my IQ level, because he's like, I wish I had this kid's brain, like this kind of stuff. So I watched that happen, and then I watched the way that women were used primarily to do things, and I understood that the words of a woman would outdo the evidence of a man. And I watched people, like, especially when they came in and did these things when they started using these domestic laws, a woman would not have any problem. She got pissed off at a man, didn't have a mark on her, called the police, he went to jail. Mm-hmm. Right? Watch this happen. Right? And so forth. We watched women weaponize the justice system. Then I had, like with the custody case with my oldest daughter in the 90s. Whatever the women said was the gospel truth. Did not matter what I said, what evidence I did, nothing. So I sat down and I watched that and I was like, I'm sorry. That's not the way due process works. Like, it should be about what you prove. But we watched this happen. So feminism has not done anything good, because now that same um, family court system that was weaponized to destroy the men is now being turned on women, and it was designed to destroy men, and now they don't have a hope. So everybody's lives are getting worse because of this. We need to go back to law and order and allow things to go their natural course and work together, because men are bad women and women are bad men. I mean, we need to work together for society to function. And that's the whole point. It's not misogynistic. We want to thrive, not die, right?
Mhm. That's really the shocking and sad irony of this, is that they pit women in this framing against men, and what they're doing and what we're doing is having a detrimental effect on both of us. It's we are one, and that's how we work. We have to work with one another. So, I mean, just with that framing, setting up that adversarial framing, it's you could see it's indicative of some of the broader problems we've seen. But we're coming close to the end here, Dale. Why don't, before we go, you let everyone know where they can find you and anything that you want to promote?
Yes. You can find me at DJS Richardson on X, True Social. I'm also on Facebook. You can see, if you go to or the Cares Project, if you go to there on Rumble or Facebook or any of that, you'll see all the links in the description. You can go to all my links / the Cares Project, or all my links / um, Dale Richardson, and you'll be able to find the links and so forth. We have some petitions actually that kind of touch on a lot of the stuff that we were talking about. We have one here in Alberta that we just brought in because it was there with me, my daughter, Archer Pulowski, and Derek Reimer, and talked about the whole issue of where our country is going. But with Derek Reimer's case, it was definitely persecution from the state about standing up for the sexualization of children. And this is the most detrimental aspect of the feminism, is that women are now being recruited to sexualize children and indoctrinate them, because they are the natural teachers. And when you're looking at this stuff being pushed in the schools, who are most of the elementary teachers? They're women. If men were doing what the women were doing, men would go to prison. So we're being allowing this to happen, and women were the ones who started to call the whistle on this. But we need the men to work with the women, because it's a very different when 100 men show up with 100 women, because they know that if something goes wrong and the men are there to protect the women, people are going to end up on the wrong side of things if men don't like what's going on. And they need to have that backing. So we have to come together to work together. This is the biggest thing that I can stress, because we're different, but we are both equal in value, but we have different roles, and we need to work together to win this.
Awesome. That's a good closer. So, any relevant material, petitions, or anything, Dale, why don't you tag it to the bottom of the post of the stream? Anything that's relevant, that you any documentation or anything like that, and then people can find it on my X profile.
Yeah, I'll do that, and I'll do that once we wrap up. I'll tag it underneath there and
Yeah.
put some links for people to find, because I mean, this is important. We need to come together. We need to hold the government accountable, because they are the real enemy of all of the people, the ones that are working for these elitists
Mhm.
that we have nothing in common with.
Yeah, we always have more in common with each other than we do with these people that are endeavoring to subjugate us, quite literally.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Perfect word, subjugate.
Yes, but that was a great conversation, Dale. I definitely like to talk with you again in the future. We'll hang around after I take us off air here, and we'll chat a little bit. I just want to thank everyone for watching, and again, if I can appeal one more time for you guys to share this. I get the most of my views after the live broadcast, so it's still relevant. Thank you guys for watching. My name's JP Berg, and this is Dumb the Wiser. Cheers.